It started like any other night on The Daily Show, but nobody expected what was coming. Jon Stewart back behind the desk with his signature smirk casually glanced at the camera, and then dropped a joke so sharp, so specifically targeted, that it split the internet in half. Meghan Markle, he said, pausing for effect, is basically a mini Braegron great at slapping her man into place. The crowd roared. And just like that, the tone around Meghan Markle changed again.
It doesn't have to be this way. Hey, girl. Down on your luck. You get a podcast, you can still terrorize people. And no, I do not want to be on it.
Now, if you're not in the loop on Brigitte Macron, she's a first lady of France, decades older than her husband Emmanuel Macron, and frequently painted in European media as overly controlling or publicly assertive. There's an infamous clip of her brushing off the president's hand at a diplomatic event, a split-second gesture that lit up headline. That's a comparison Jon Stewart pulled, and he didn't just make it in passing, he constructed the entire segment around it, building a brutal comedy bit that poked at every crack in Meghan's Polish image. This wasn't some throwaway tabloid joke either. This was Jon Stewart, the guy many still think of as one of the smartest comedic voices in American television. He is not known for petty jabs or internet gossip. So when he decides to go after Meghan Markle, it feels different. He wasn't just roasting celebrity, he was making a statement, and people heard it. The reaction was instant. Twitter, or whatever we're calling it now, blew up. Memes popped up. Within minutes, Meghan standing next to Brigitte with a caption, "Boss babes" or "Bossa babes." Others showed Prince Harry edited into that Macron clip, awkwardly trying to hold Meghan's hand while she waves him off like a bodyguard. And you could feel the shift. For years, Meghan had managed to maintain this delicate balance between victimhood and empowerment, between royalty and rebel. Stewart's joke knocked the whole structure sideways. According to reports that followed, Meghan was absolutely livid behind closed doors. The Sussex team was scrambling. She apparently viewed the segment as not just mean-spirited but sexist, outdated, and deeply unfair. But here's the thing, most people didn't see it that way. They saw a well-crafted bit of satire, finally saying what a lot of folks have been whispering for a while, that maybe, just maybe, Meghan's whole empowerment persona feels off. And that podcast didn't help. Confessions of a female founder, the project that was supposed to showcase Meghan's intellect and insight, ended up being Exhibit A in what critics call her brand's decline. The show was all gloss and zero grit, soft questions, vague affirmations, and a whole lot of thank you for asking without actually answering anything. Stewart, with his usual bite, tore it apart. He joked it was less about female founders and more about a foundering female. The crowd howled, and somewhere in Montecito, a PR assistant probably quit on the spot. The issue here isn't just a joke, it's a timing. Meghan's image has been taking slow hits for months, unfulfilled deals, awkward interviews, and that strange sense that something just isn't landing the way it used to. She was once hailed as a fresh-faced outsider taking on the dusty old monarchy, but now the narrative's slipping, and Stewart didn't just call attention to that slip, he shoved it under a spotlight. What makes this burn even deeper is who delivered it. Jon Stewart isn't Megyn Kelly or Piers Morgan. He's not part of the conservative outrage machine. He's a liberal icon beloved by the very demographic that Meghan's team has worked so hard to court. Feminist, progressives, creatives, these were her people, and now they're laughing. The joke about Meghan slapping her husband into place was more than just a line. It was a cultural gut punch. It implied control, emasculation, dominance. And whether or not that's true, the fact that it resonated so loudly says something about how people see the Sussexes right now. Prince Harry, once the cool royal rebel, now gets portrayed as a guy trailing behind his wife at red carpet events, carrying her purse and nodding along. Somewhere along the way, the narrative flip. What used to be seen as noble rebellion now feels like curated chaos, and in a media landscape obsessed with authenticity, Meghan's carefully composed image is starting to feel less inspiring and more exhausting. That's what made Stewart's joke so dangerous. It wasn't wild or conspiratorial. It wasn't even mean-spirited, really. It was just well-observed, which is way worse. It meant he was tapping into a truth that people already felt. That Meghan Markle's public brand, this image of strength, leadership, compassion, might just be a little too manufactured. And in America, when satire gets you like that, it's often a turning point, not just in media, but in culture. It's how a public figure shifts from iconic to ironic. 1 minute you're the voice of change, the next you're the punchline. Meghan's team will probably try to spin this. There might be a new appearance, a statement, maybe even a fresh cause, but the damage has been done up. People aren't just questioning her, they are laughing at her, and in The age of memes and instant reaction, that's not something you can PR your way out of. The sting wasn't just in the punchline, it was in how perfectly it captured everything people had been citing for years. Meghan's brand had always thrived on control. Every statement, every appearance, every project had layers of polish, from the carefully posed family photos to the organic moments and interviews that somehow still felt like rehearsed monologues. It all screamed strategy, but the more you tried to control perception, the faster people start looking for cracks. And Stewart didn't just find the cracks, he pried them open with a crowbar of comedy. He zeroed in on confessions of a female founder. And let's be honest, that podcast didn't exactly help her case. Marketed as a celebration of female entrepreneurship, it landed more like an overpriced TED Talk trapped in a Whole Foods aisle. Every episode followed the same script, a soft-spoken intro, lots of affirmations, and a bizarre refusal to get real. At no point did the show dig into the ugly, unfiltered grind that real founders go through. No financial risks, no breakdowns, no hard-earned wins, just vague stories about alignment and vision. Critics weren't being cruel when they said it felt fake. They were being honest. Meghan had never actually built a company. There were no payroll struggles, no hiring headaches, no product launches. The only thing she'd ever really founded was a media brand attached to her royal title, and even that wasn't holding up too well. Deals were getting dropped, traction was slipping, and even her Netflix animation project Pearl got quietly axed before it could make a single ripple. So when Stewart joked that the show was less about founders and more about someone foundering, it hit harder than it should have, not because it was brutal, but because it was accurate. He was calling out what everyone was thinking, that Meghan's version of struggle was so sanitized it felt like a parody of real ambition. And when the joke landed, there wasn't a single gasp from the audience, just laughter. That's the worst kind of rejection, not outrage, indifference. Prince Harry didn't get off easy either. Stewart's dig at him, an unemployed immigrant who gave up his family, his home, and now carries his wife's handbag at charity dinners, wasn't just cruel. It was surrogate, cut straight through the royal rebel image Harry had tried to build since leaving the monarchy. The tell all interviews, a memoir, the constant emphasis on finding his voice. It all clashed with a version Stewart painted, a guy in the background of his own story. And let's be real, that's what people are starting to see at public events. Harry rarely speaks anymore. Meghan takes center stage, delivers the lines, makes the emotional pitches. Harry stands beside her, smiling like a security guard in a tuxedo. That may sound harsh, but optics matter, especially when your brand depends on visibility. If the public starts seeing you as a prop in your partner's journey, the sympathy disappears fast. The irony is that both Meghan and Harry built their post-royal brand on being real. They said they left the palace because it was stifling, because it didn't let them be authentic. But outside those palace walls, they knew life started looking just a stage. From the perfectly timed paparazzi walks to the private home footage in their Netflix docu-series, nothing felt organic anymore. And when authenticity starts to feel curated, it becomes comedy fodder. Stewart didn't invent the Meghan backlash, he just accelerated it. Until then, criticism of the Sussexes mostly lived in conservative circles, tabloid columns, or angry YouTube rants. But this was something else. This was a respected comedian, someone known for his progressive values, saying out loud that the emperor wasn't wearing clothes, and the audience clapped. That's not just a PR problem, that's a cultural shift. It wasn't about her being a woman or being biracial or being an outsider. That's the argument her defenders usually reach for. But Stewart's joke wasn't punching down. It was punching through the branding, through the scripted vulnerability, through the endless cycle of polished victimhood. He wasn't mocking her identity, he was mocking the way she used it as armor. The laughter in that studio wasn't cruel. It was tired of being told to admire someone who always seemed just out of reach, tired of being sold empowerment without substance, tired of seeing authenticity packaged like luxury skin out. The punchline landed not because people hate Meghan, but because they no longer feel like they know who she really is. And here's the truth that makes this even messier. Jon Stewart is the kind of comedian who chooses his targets carefully. He doesn't chase clout. He doesn't jump on easy trends. If he decided to take that shot, it means he thought the public was ready to hear it. That's the quiet part no one wants to say out loud, that maybe, just maybe, the tide has turned, not because people hate Meghan, but because they stopped buying what she's selling. Meghan's brand has always been about narrative control, the story frame, the image lead the conversation. From her Oprah interview to her glossy documentary, she positioned herself as a Voice of modern royalty, unapologetically bold, effortlessly elegant, and misunderstood by the institutions that sought to silence her. But when satire starts doing the talking, the narrative slips away from the person who once owned it. That's the real danger Meghan now faces, not defamation, irrelevance. The comparison to Brigitte wasn't pulled out of thin air. It was chosen for maximum impact, a woman seen as smart and stylish, but often criticized for her dominance in the public eye and her icy demeanor behind the scenes. That label Brigitte Macron was a loaded one. It painted Meghan as a figure who doesn't just overshadow her husband, but actively shapes him into a supporting character in her own play. In any other context, the joke might have been shrugged off, but from Jon Stewart with applause as its soundtrack, it turned into a headline. Meghan's reaction, described by insiders as furious and humiliated, is exactly what made the bit so effective. The moment a public figure starts taking themselves too seriously, comedy finds them, and Meghan, for all her poise and planning, forgot that sometimes the best way to protect your image is to let the joke land and move on. Instead, she's spiraling, scrambling to salvage a reputation that's no longer in her control. Her team has tried to pivot, of course, reports of new initiatives, fresh partnerships, even whispers of a media comeback, but the vibe has shifted. No matter how polished the rollout, the public now views everything she does through the lens of performance. A new podcast manufactured, a new charity project PR, a candid moment with her kids staged. That's the problem. When your authenticity gets laughed off the stage, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore. And Harry, his image has crumbled even faster. Once a prince who walked away from the crown to protect his wife is now portrayed as a lost figure trailing behind her, unable to find his own voice or direction. His memoir, Spare, was supposed to reclaim his story. Instead, it came off as a mix of therapy session and tabloid overshare, raising more eyebrows than empathy. Stewart's joke about the handbag and the exile wasn't just funny, it was brutal because it was visual. Everyone could picture it, and once a joke paints a picture that sticks, it's hard to unsee it. There's something uniquely dangerous about comedy that tells the truth too well. It doesn't get debated, it gets repeated. On social media, clips from The Daily Show are still circulating. People aren't arguing over them. They're adding captions, stitching reactions, making TikTok that push the mockery even further. Meghan and Harry aren't being dragged by critics anymore. They're being memed by former fans. This kind of backlash isn't loud, it's cold. You don't see angry headlines or massive boycotts. You see silence, dwindling views, uninterested crowds. The very thing Meghan built her brand on attention is now slipping, and that's worse than hate. Hate keeps your name in the news. Indifference pushes you out of it. Hollywood has noticed media executives who once lined up for deals are quietly backing off podcast contracts, are ending. Early public interest is waning, not because Meghan did something unforgivable, but because she stopped being compelling. When every sentence sounds rehearsed, every smile looks timed, and every project feels like a PR stunt, the audience doesn't get angry, they get bored. There was a time when Meghan symbolized something bigger than herself. She was a mixed-race woman who challenged a centuries-old institution. She was the American actress turned duchess turned activist. She was supposed to be the face of a new kind of monarchy, one that stood for progress and change. But now, stripped of the mystique and propped up by failing content, she's just another celebrity fighting to stay relevant in a landscape that moves too fast to care. Jon Stewart didn't destroy Meghan Markle. He didn't need to, he just lit the The real explosion came from the cultural oxygen already surrounding her, a mix of public fatigue, broken expectations, and years of polished performance finally cracking under scrutiny. The laughter wasn't about the joke, it was about the release, the collective sigh of an audience done pretending they couldn't see the strings. And now Meghan faces the hardest battle in media, rebuilding interest, not sympathy, not outrage, just attention. The challenge is that she can't use the same tools anymore. The victim card has expired, the feminist branding feels hollow, the fairy tale has worn off. If she wants to regain credibility, she'll have to strip it all back, drop the branding, show real struggle, real success, something unscripted. But that's a hard pivot for someone who spent years perfecting the narrative, and in a world where satire moves faster than sincerity, she may not get the time to try, because when Jon Stewart makes you the punchline in the world